Hi, I am Dr. Zaina Bizri. You can call me Dr. B, and we are here to have a conversation about artificial intelligence, AI, and does it broker or signal the end of the academy, the end of higher education as we know it. I am a historian, a college professor, and I am a digital pedagogy specialist. There we go. And I have been working with online tools and with AI in the classroom and outside of the classroom for some time now. And I think that it is time that we actually had a conversation about what is it and how can we use it instead of trying to fix the problems after the fact. I'm here with my friend, Dr. Liz Dubois, who's going to so kindly interview me today. And we're going to talk about why we need to actually address AI instead of react to it.
Hi, I'm Dr. Liz Dubois. I am an executive coach and a divorce coach. I work with a number of professors, folks in the academic field who are struggling with, as the technology evolves, as the different things that we do in the classroom are changing, how do I, as a professional, adapt to that? I have my own feelings, insecurities, frustrations, as well as the monumental task of figuring out what do I actually do. So with all of that out of the way, like Dr. B said, I am going to interview her, talk a little bit about what we feel is going on in the academy and how we move forward. And you can call me Dr. Liz going forward. And here we go. Okay, so Dr. B, Zaina, good friend of mine who I love. The reason I'm excited to have this conversation is you said something to me a couple of weeks ago that just like hit me right in the gut, which was people can Google, right, what the Peloponnesian War is. We don't have to teach content anymore. I don't think that's what you said. And you said we can't teach content anymore. We can't. We're at a point in our evolution in terms of technology, in terms of the academy, that teaching content is something that's irrelevant. And so what do we do now? And you had some really profound thoughts on that. And so I turn the microphone over to you. What do we do now?
Well, this comes from a point, as I said before, as you brought up, that it's really hard to just focus on teaching content, especially in history, because Google exists. We all have our phone, and we can get information on any topic in less time than it takes to ask the question. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much about giving them all of the individual pieces of why there were 3 Punic Wars, but it's about having them come to that conclusion on their own. Okay. So using the content to get them to the point where they understand why that content is important. We're not teaching information at this point because the information is there. What we're teaching is analysis, we're teaching context, and we are teaching how to apply it to other problems, to their life, to any question that they have that come up. One of the ways that I describe my classes is that, by the end of this class, you're going to understand how we got to this moment in time. Mm-hmm. Because without that context, without that knowledge of the choices people are making, a lot of what's been happening in the last 15 years just doesn't seem to make any sense. But there is internally consistent logic. What we have to be doing is teaching them how to find that internally consistent logic. And this applies across the humanities, okay? Mm-hmm. You have your content, yes, and that's important, yes. But what you need to do is recognize what part of your content they can get off of the internet and have it be completely accurate and completely good to go. Now you have to teach them how to use it. Again, back to history, we have to teach them, like, how do you determine if that is an accurate response that you got off the internet? For example, in a language class where you're writing, maybe you got the grammatical construction absolutely accurate, but now you have to understand the idiom that goes in with that. And maybe if you write this sentence that makes sense in English and you translate it into another language, you just produced gibberish. You need to know how to translate that even further. The computer doesn't know that. So that's what we have to shift to what does the human know that the
Mhm.
computer can't do?
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense as you're talking. What's coming to mind is two things. One, right, we're not churning out people who know things. We're creating people who know what to do with that information, right? We're building critical thinkers, not people who can recite whatever, right? And what's striking me just oof is this idea of like I can go Google how many people died at Auschwitz, right? That's a thing that I can find out, like you said, faster than I can ask the question. But that doesn't tell me why that matters to what's going on today, right? And so our job as people that help construct how people are able to process information in the world is less about what does that information say and more about why does that information matter. Do you feel like that is something that AI is able to do though, right? These are supercomputers and softwares and blah, 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 algorithms and all of it. Like, are we looking at a point in human history where that why does this information matter to how we're constructing policies and making, meaning of our day-to-day lives? Are we at a point in history where that is also being taken over by AI or being surpassed perhaps?
No, AI cannot do this. This is the
Yeah.
human thing. Okay, so AI, artificial intelligence, it's not intelligent. It's been programmed by someone. And I will, oh, I've been saying this for a long time and I will continue to say it until I'm blue in the face. It's sophisticated pattern matching.
Mm.
AI that we have right now is extremely sophisticated, but it's looking at what a million people said in response to this question, and it says this is the most common response. It's crunching the data numbers basically. It's turning various
Mm.
responses into A, B, C, and D, and then 17% is the highest number, and they gave answer Q, so here's answer Q. Yeah,
Mm.
but it's not actually thinking. It's not intelligence. The why, that's where the human comes in. It's
Yeah.
important to know that computers do math very, very well. They're built to do extremely sophisticated calculations very, very, very quickly. And when you give a computer a data set, it's going to turn that into numbers, make a calculation, and spit back an answer out at you. Fine. That's, you know, I need to know, where did the people, the Jews of Czechoslovakia get sent during the Holocaust?
Mhm.
AI, Google search can find that for me. Okay, that's statistical information. What percentage of the people or anything like that? Why they were sent there? Why is it important that we know about this? Why do we need to know about the Holocaust in general? All of that is something that AI cannot answer because it requires value judgments. AI doesn't have that ability.
Yeah.
It's the computer, and those algorithms were written by a group of people. And those answers are going to come from the perspective of that group of people who wrote that algorithm.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it can sound like it's done the value judgment. It can sound like it's done the thinking. It hasn't. It hasn't. It's scraping from the internet and pulling in a lot of different ideas, sure, but it's not creating anything new.
Oif, oif. Yeah, I've someone showed me a poll that online, this is probably 2 days ago, right? Today's Juneteenth that we're recording. Somebody showed me a poll online that was an aggregate data from conservative people on social media, right? And it said which has been a holiday the longest, Juneteenth, Pride Month, or Toyotathon, right? And right? Like if you ask AI that, well, when did it was Independence Day in Galveston, Texas, and like, but now it's June, right? There's so many different ways to do that. But if you're, I said to that person, I said, the only thing that that poll shows is that no one that answered it was gay or black, right? And so when we've got this kind of like value, it's like it's information in a vacuum. It sounds like, right? It's correct, accurate, constructed information, but it's happening in a black hole of information that's coming from different people's perspective, right? Like perhaps Toyotathon has been a longer running holiday if you ask a certain subset of people, right? And does that make it right if you're looking at a million data points and aggregating that information, spitting that answer out and saying, well, it's about selling RAV4s or whatever the fuck, right? And it's such a stark example of how accurate information can become information that drives how we see the world, right? But if that information's accurate through the eyes of the particular person putting it into these algorithms, right? And that makes it sound like nefarious and like evil scientist, and it's not, right? But if we think about how our society has evolved, how human societies have evolved over the course of time, it's not the voice of the majority that drives innovation, right? And so if we're talking about like how, we have 100 data points that are giving us an answer, and only 3 of them are counter to a narrative that's actually constructed out of things that are, reinforcing class, reinforcing race, reinforcing gender disparities. Is it the right answer? Perhaps, right? But is it the one that keeps people in a place of disenfranchisement, right?
Yeah, and I think that you hit on 2 different points here. One, context, and 2, what is right. So
or even real, right? What's real?
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to go that far, but we can go there.
I'll go there.
We'll go there. So context, that's an important concept that I teach to my students. And it's something that as a historian, as a person living in the world, that you need to understand is that nothing happens in a bubble. There is no one in the world that is completely independent of every other person. I don't care about bootstrap culture or people who are like off the grid and like have like the bunker and everything. You had to buy that land from someone. You had to buy the bits for the bunker from someone. You had to get that off the grid set up, and you had to deal with the city to get yourself off the grid. Like, you had to deal with people to get that set up. Okay. No one operates independently anywhere. We have a society right now that does not have a space for that. And I think that's a good thing overall to make us interact with each other in some way. But we tend to teach concepts, especially in history, and well, I'm less sure about philosophy, but I know that sociology and anthropology tend to be more about like, let's talk about the whole community. But in history, we'll talk about events that are kind of as they're separated from each other. One of my biggest pet peeves as someone who taught world history for 8 years is students come in with this belief that first the Greek Empire happened, and then the Roman Empire happened, and then the Ottoman Empire happened. And no, Rome was founded before the Greek city-states had their rise of power. And in comparison, Greece was fairly short-lived. Macedonia came in and ran into, proto-Ottomans who eventually did take over. And sure, the Ottomans are after the Greeks, but they're not after the Romans. And they're interacting with each other because trade exists, and they want stuff from other parts of the world. So yeah, Romans, who are picking up Christianity and creating the papacy, are also interacting with Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. We've been having these connections since these religions have been around. We've been having these connections since we have created societies of any kind.
Yeah, and I feel like the thing, right, if we're thinking about like, is AI like spell the doom of the academy, because now our students can generate this information through the click of a button. I feel like the thing that AI can't do is answer the question, and so what, right?
Yes.
Like that happened, right? Okay, we can go find out that these cultures were blending and mixing in all of these different ways. And so what, right? Like, what does that tell us about how to live today, right? And what the pitfalls are, right? What to avoid today.
Yeah. Having the context of this connection, in the ancient period makes it easier to understand the connections that we have today, makes it clearer. And it also makes the conflict we have today easier to understand. It's when I start talking about context and people will ask me a question of like, so one of my favorites was, can you tell me a little bit about the start of the Cold War? I'm like, well, I could go back to 1870, but I don't think you want me to.
Yes.
Because the context is so important to understand why people are making those choices. AI can't find that. AI can only tell you what its data set tells it. And back to your point about kind of the right answer, from the data set that survey gave it of Juneteenth Pride and Toyotathon, sure, if everybody who answered that said Toyotathon, then yes, that is the right answer, but it's not an accurate answer. And we need to get away from this idea that there is like one answer to every question. Like there are some questions that have a fairly set answer. When was Pearl Harbor attacked by the Japanese? And it's December 7th, 1941. We can say that. That's when it happened. Everything else we can discuss. And we need to put into context. So yeah, the AI can give you that December 7th date, but can't tell you about the long-term implications beyond the US joining World War II. Because the data set that it has will say, well, Pearl Harbor is attacked, the US joins World War II. It can give you that answer, but it can't go beyond that, because that, again, depends on context, the sources, and a lot of factors that absolutely require a human analyzing them.
Oh my God. I feel like I have 87 million things going on in my brain right now. You're just sparking just like so many. Yeah, I'm like sitting on the patio, right? And my great uncle Frankie's flag from his casket is folded up in the living room in one of those like flag boxes. It was presented to my dad at his funeral, and it's in the living room. And my son like waltzed up to my dad over the weekend. My son is 10, and he said, Uncle John, why is that flag there? And my dad was explaining about my Uncle Frankie and how he was in Japan and how he earned the Bronze Star and all this stuff. And he ends with, and that's why Americans don't speak Japanese today. And I understood that. I got where he was coming, and I'm like, maybe that's not the best thing to say to a 10-year-old, right? But I understood what he was saying, right? Like we had a number of different people step forward, and they served in this way in the context that it was appropriate. And, that's the reason why the way, World War II shook out that way, right? But my dad's specific words were, and that's why we don't speak Japanese today. And my son opens his phone to his Duolingo and says, well, I'm learning Japanese, and starts saying shit in Japanese, right? And I was just like, this is the difference between getting an answer and understanding like the course of history as it unfolds, right? Like
Yes.
at one point in American history, like my 76-year-old father was very proud to say what he said, right? And now here we are, I don't know, a while, quite a while later, probably 4 decades, 5 decades later, right? And it's an incredibly uncouth thing to say, but also AI is teaching my son Japanese on his phone,
Yep.
right? And so we've gone from we're in like a horrific conflict with the culture, and the way that we're going to emphasize that we haven't been colonized is by our language. And my son is saying, well, actually, I'm earning a trip to Tokyo. Once I'm fluent, I get to go, whatever in high school. And I think that it's not just the human element of like, are we aggregating data in a way that spits out a, objectively true answer, right? Are we understanding the course of human history in a way that allows us to not fuck up again in ways that really, harm our, right? Like my Uncle Frankie killed 3 people, and perhaps he's a war hero, and perhaps he's a murderer, right? And that's not an answer that AI can give us, unless we're putting in information that's skewed from one viewpoint or the other. It's complicated. And I think, again, the kind of, and so what aspect, right? In the academy, we're not ideally teaching the objective facts. We're objective, right? I am a sociologist, so I'm like, objective. I don't even like that word, right?
No.
But if we deconstruct it, right, and we say fundamentally, I'm sitting, on my patio and it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit, that's an objective fact, right? Ish. we separate the objective from the meaningful, right? The practical, the useful, the applicationable, right? Like, how do I apply my understanding of something? Pearl Harbor, right? Being an example. How do I apply my understanding of this to the choices that I am making today, both in my individual life and in an aggregate level, you know, who I'm voting for, how I'm thinking, what I'm saying to my children, etc.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that we have this conceit that we are able to be objective, because I agree with you, objectivity does not exist. It gets back to context. Everyone experiences things differently in their own personal context. We all have different experiences that inform our lives. And so that's going to affect how we answer questions and how we perceive the world. So, but we do have this conceit that we are rational beings, you know, it's an enlightenment thing, is that we're not dealing with magic and superstition anymore. We are logic and we are rational and we want things that are measurable, which takes us to this, you know, AI revolution where they say, hey, here's this objective way to get the information that you want that isn't skewed. And all information is skewed when it comes
Yeah.
to pulling it from AI, because again, people wrote the algorithm and people produce the information that the algorithm is drawing from. Even if, like, I've had people say, well, I got it from students, I got it from the encyclopedia, so it has to be objective. It's like a person wrote that. Everything that you consume was created by a person who had opinions, who had biases that they might not even be aware of. That comes through and that colors the information that they are producing. I'm working on an assignment for the fall where I'm looking for articles or videos on a hot button topic. And I'm going to assign one on each side and then tell my students to say, okay, so what is their stance? What are their biases? And I want you to pretend to agree with them and then pretend to disagree with them. I don't want them to actually think and see if they can do that. And I'm still working out the case. But yeah, I want them to be able to realize that depending on what information you have, you can actually skew what other people believe. And I mean, we see the disinformation machine that's going on. It can be really subtle. So that's kind of what, and by blindly putting our faith in AI, which seems to be how some people are going, we are opening ourselves up to accepting a very specific view of the world. It is not an exaggeration to say that the people who program a lot of the tools that we use on the internet have historically been cis, straight, upper or middle class white men. And that comes through no matter how much work they have done, no matter how kind of progressive they thought they were in the 1980s and the 1990s, even in the 90s when they're programming Google, like their biases come through. And it affects how information is processed and presented. You know, we talk a lot right now about the algorithm on social media, how the algorithm decides kind of what posts are going to get prioritized and, you know, what's going to get censored, what's going to get shadow banned, and kind of what's going to get promoted and all of these things. And then even if none of that is happening, just based on what one person is viewing, well, maybe another person who viewed these 3 videos wants to see this video too. And they're guessing based on another person's experiences. The early users were the people who created it. And yeah, they fit that main demographic. And that algorithm was trained on a very narrow chunk or piece of the population. And that's still there. And as long as we refuse to see that, we're going to have issues with all of these tools and programs and algorithms.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said the words refuse to see this. I think from my vantage point, right? You and I have different politics. I'm much more conservative. And yet what we can agree on is that this information is like not disconnected from a political, and I mean that not in the sense of Democrats and Republicans or conservatives and liberals. I mean that in the sense of the way that we interact in the world implicitly has ramifications for power, right? Whether that's, are we gonna, they're building a 34 new homes where the old Safeway used to be in my neighborhood, right? And it's gonna have racial implications. It's gonna have implications for what am I trying to say? For income disparities. I'm not sure why the word income went out of my head there, right? And so all of these different decisions that seem so kind of on a micro level, right? They have these larger implications. So even if we can both say, like, you and I are committed to people being able to have a place to live, it comes with all of these assumptions built into it that are informed by social media, right? And it's like, it's subtle. I don't think it's a refusal to see it. I think it's like a mix of things, right? It's so subtle, right? And it's so well done, right? And would you know, right? Like my partner and I can be lying next to each other in the same queen size bed, on the same model of phone, on the same TikTok, and we see vastly different things because our politics are kind of like 5 degrees apart, right? And like as a boater, I know that like 5 degrees, if you go out far enough, you can end up in really different places. But it's powerful in its subtlety. It's the subtlety that makes it powerful, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's subtle and we don't see it. On the one hand, it's normalized. On the other
Yeah.
hand, it's not something that we think about because we have so many other things like that that we just don't think about. I mean, my favorite story about unconscious bias is a symphony wanted to work towards getting equity in representation. So they set up blind auditions
Mhm.
and they went from something like 15% women to like 35% women, but they knew they needed to get closer to 50. And what they did was instead of not just blind, where the people in the audience couldn't see the people coming on, they put down carpets so they couldn't hear the high heels clap.
Click, 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 click.
Yep, because they didn't realize they were latching
Yeah.
on and saying, "Oh, that's a woman." That
Mhm.
was completely subconscious. They had no idea they were doing it.
Yeah.
That's the level that this algorithm is getting to, is that we don't see it. It's
Yeah.
so subtle and we're so used to it that unless you're actively kind of searching for where it's making choices for you, you're
Yeah.
not really see it.
Yep, yep. And I think that there's two things. I'm just like writing notes. There's like, ugh, I can't talk and write. I know that about myself. Um, yeah, I think it's the subtlety, right? In the unconscious bias. One of the ways that I think we shoot ourselves in the foot, right? If we're talking about looking at like the implication of information and then like spanning it out over a course of time, right? That kind of like bar graph of like, this is the difference and this is what happens. I feel like one of the biggest ways that we are fucking ourselves over as a society is that we are reacting to these subtleties and differences in information, right? All of which is being generated in the algorithm, right? Have so many things to say on that. But when we say, well, this is a refusal to see it, right? Like we are refusing to see how hegemonic power structures are interwoven in this AI, into the algorithms, into the programming, right? We refuse to see it. I think for like a significant, like greater like significant portion of the population, I like want to put a number on it, I can't, significant portion of the population, it's that there's no time, right? We have like 100,000 things to do and the last thing on the list is to go look up whether or not something's fake news, right? And so if the AI is spitting out things that have just a subtlety, right, of a kind of like if you're making a martini, like a whiff of vermouth, right? A whiff of information that skews how you're going to see it. You don't have people again lying in their queen beds going, I think that might be fake news. You need to Google it, right? That happens in my household. Maybe it happens in other households, but I think for the vast majority of people, it's how am I going to afford groceries? This stuff just went up. How do I afford gas? This just went up, right? Like my kids are in daycare now, they're in summer camp. Blah, 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 blah. We don't have time to really sit and like refuse or not refuse to see these things. It's like we just get like carried along in the, the lazy river of too much stuff to do.
Yeah, on some level, yeah, it is people who are, taking a look at what they have to do and say, this cannot be a priority. This is, I have X number, X amount of energy and Y amount of stuff to do, and I have more stuff to do than I have energy. So I am deprioritizing this, and this is something I have decided. Either I'm aware of it or I'm just not even dealing with it and I'm just letting it go. That's absolutely a thing. And that's part of the kind of refusing to see it. And, refusing might be a bad word for a blanket term, but
I think it's good in that it's good in that it makes my point. Like, I think one of the parts of the cultural divide that then gets woven into these AI algorithms is that, I'm gonna like be grossly overgeneralizing here, but stick with me, is that like the liberals think that, oh, we're refusing to see this and we have to be aware of history, da, 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 da. And if you're not, you're racist, right? And then we have the right going, fuck you. My 3 closest friends from high school are Black. What the fuck are you doing? And then we get into these pissing matches of, well, you can be racist and still have Black friends, and back and forth because again, we have these like 5 degrees of separation in the ways in which these algorithms are kicking out information to us, right? And so I can say in my friend group, it looks like that, but I'm not racist because I think this way, right? And my friend group, it looks like that, but they think I'm racist because I haven't adopted this ideology that says I constantly have to be deconstructing and questioning whatever it is that I'm looking at.
yeah, it can get politicized very, very, very easily.
Yep.
And I think it's important to remember that we use these all the time. Like all the time. Algorithms determine where stuff is in the grocery store. Okay. It's everywhere. We have quote unquote artificial intelligence. Again, this very sophisticated pattern matching, pattern recognition. That is basically using existing data to kind of find the optimal pathing or the optimal structure or anything like that. And to constantly be on the lookout for that is exhausting. Knowing where to put your energy on that is a whole other process. Is I think at least for me, it wasn't until I started thinking about it that I realized, like, I started the process of like, analyzing and checking and see where the algorithm is pushing things. And I was like, this is huge. This is everywhere. I have to figure out what is important enough for me to do that work on and what do I have to let go. Because every single person has a limit on their energy and their ability to cognate on any topic. And you have to be aware of that, and you have to be respectful of that, of yourself and your time and your energy. And I think because these algorithms are so ubiquitous, there just comes a point where people kind of, they don't give up. They accept. They just accept that this is how it is. We live in an algorithmically driven society. That is what it is right now, and maybe we can change it and maybe we can't, but
and maybe we should, or maybe we shouldn't, right? That's also a question. That's
another question. But as you said, look, I have to go get gas and do my laundry today. I have things that need to happen today, and this challenging or normalizing this algorithm-based society is going to have to get pushed down the list today. And like, that's a calculation that every person has to make.
Yeah, right. And whether or not it's a conscious one, is kind of a different component. I want to ask, how does that show up in your teaching, and what is your guidance for other academics?
So there are two aspects to this. There are, how does it show up with teachers and how does it show up with students?
Mhm.
The one with students is the one that academics get the most worked up about because everyone jumps to using Chat GPT to cheat.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, that's a problem. But 20 years ago, students were buying papers.
Mhm.
They're paying someone to take the test for them. They're doing all kinds of things to cheat on tests. They're stealing answer keys. They're trying to get the Scantron sheet so that they know what the bubble pattern is before the exam. Like all of these things are cheating techniques that students have used since well before AI was even a consideration. So on the one hand, student's gonna student.
Yeah.
um, so it's not that AI is this new form of cheating. It just changed a couple of
Evolution.
yeah, it just changed a couple of methods that would happen. And it's a thing I keep seeing in kind of academic spaces of people coming up to final exams or a major exam. How do I prevent them from teaching? And
Cheating or
or
cheating?
cheating. Sorry, how to prevent them from cheating? And the answer is, get a time machine, go back and change your syllabus, and change the assignments that you created. Make them hard
Mhm.
to be generated by Chat GPT or any of these bots, and structure it that way. And yeah, that's more work for the teacher. Yes, you end
Right,
up
but
with
that's our job, right?
things that are harder to grade. And speaking as someone who in one semester I had close to 300 students. Yeah, I mean, I understand why this is a real problem when you've got numbers like that and a very set amount of time to get grades in. How do you make these kind of cheat-proof exams? And I know a lot of people are going back to in-person physical exams at this point. But what I did was I restructured what I was asking for because I restructured what I was teaching them. And that was that shift from teaching them content to teaching them skills.
Yeah, oh, man. Oh, say it again for the people in the back.
I shifted from teaching the content to teaching the skills. The
Yeah.
content is it's the delivery device for the skill.
Mm-hmm.
Finding the sources, assessing the kind of source that you have, analyzing the source, making connections between the source, synthesizing that into a final product. One of the things that I do for my term-long project is they have to create a project that is not a paper.
Yes, love it.
Anything except a paper. You can't do that because that's the most common response. That's the most common thing that students go to. And that is also the easiest thing to fabricate because we've been writing essays on these topics for decades. But now go ahead and make me, a podcast series. Go make me a bunch of TikToks. This past quarter, I had 2 students create games, in-person games that we played as a class. Okay. It lets the students be creative and they can't go to a chat bot.
Yeah.
And how do I create a game about this historical event? They have to think on it themselves. And because it's something that they came up with and it's something unique and it's to their interest, they're a lot more excited to finish it.
I love that. I love that. Right. The churning out of thinkers versus knowers. Right.
Yes, they're thinking about what was the important thing. One project on 3 Mile Island, 3 Mile Island accident, the student finally had to come to the conclusion that they could only talk about the communication because if they wanted to talk about everything they wanted to talk about, they were going to end up writing a thesis. So,
Yeah.
so they had to figure out what was important. They had to assess what was the important thing to them. And that's what I'm trying to get them to do is think about the information that you have, think about what you're trying to communicate, and then find the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The question in my mind keeps coming back to, so what, right? As you're talking, I'm thinking about like, we bubble these students up to whatever level, right? And they're now in the workforce doing whatever it is. I think that critical thinking skill set is the thing that we are overlooking when we hand wring about, oh, AI, right? I'm thinking specifically of two things. When I was writing my dissertation, a professor shared with me like an ultimate fucking horror story of some student that had written an entire dissertation, I think it was at Princeton, about why the Berlin Wall would never fall. And he was set to defend, right? He was set to defend like weeks after it ended up falling. And what he had to do was he had to go back through all of this knowledge that he had gained, all of these facts that he had gained, and flip it on his head and say, well, this is why historians could have never predicted this, and what we need to learn from it in terms of our blind spots as we're creating public policy and history, right? So we're going back and we're deconstructing what happened, and we're saying, well, what can we learn from it? So what, right? Like, I've got all this information, so what? And then the other thought that's coming to me in terms of kind of like, what can a human do that a computer can't, right? Is when the Challenger blew up. I remember, vague memories. I was very young, but one of my first memories was standing in my backyard in Cape Canaveral watching the Challenger blow up. And I have come back at different points in my life and really been interested in learning more about that. And when I think about kind of what can a human do that a computer cannot, and what is the kind of role of a human in the work of thinking about how we live in the world and ideally progress in the world, right? And it was humans that were going and combing through fields of remains, trying to piece together what had happened, right? It was scientists going through all of the different fail safes and saying, well, where did we fuck up? And some of those things were pretty obvious, right? Unfortunately, but combing through all of those points of information, right? I think that there's kind of the next frontier is, how do we incorporate AI into the so what, right? So that we can generate, right? What's a public policy framework that would allow us to avoid, the kind of like roots of mass casualties? Because we can think about what are some of the drivers there, and therefore what are the different things that we can, now that we've got all these data points, feed into a computer and say, well, where are we missing some of this pattern recognition, right?
Yeah, yeah, and to the other part of your previous question, how teachers use AI, also connected to the Challenger disaster. With those hearings, I think it was the first day, the physicist, Dr. Richard Feynman, took an O-ring and dropped it into his ice water and showed how brittle it had gotten, kind of a visual, because he understood that you can explain things, but if you show people, that actually is a lot more effective for getting people to remember the important information. He was a very, very skilled communicator, which is a really important thing for kind of figuring out what happened to that space shuttle. And again, as I was saying about how teachers can use or deal with AI in the classroom, on the one hand, there are the plagiarism checkers like Turnitin, where they also scrape the internet. And their entire point is, we're going to scrape the internet and see if someone else wrote this. We're getting to the point where they're less helpful for certain upper level classes, because they're starting to pick up, they pick up citations, basically. They see a thing in quotes and then they find it in quotes and like it's properly cited, but they still flag it. So it's a work in progress, let's say.
Yeah.
But as educators, creators of lesson plans, creators of things for students to do so that they can learn, we can make use of AI if we're if we're willing to admit that our old way of doing things is not the only way of doing things.
Yeah.
And like that's a big emotional statement there, but like there are all kinds of little things that educators can do to make use of digital tools and things like AI. I mean, here's the thing, we all use a version of AI, those of us who use Microsoft Word, because Microsoft Word spell check and grammar check is a much simpler version of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
we've all been using it. Grammarly is also AI, and I have a lot of colleagues who use Grammarly. It's a matter of levels of sophistication, and it's a matter of how you are going to use it. And I think that we're getting caught up in kind of in this moment in higher ed of what we're actually doing. And that's the core of the question. And why, I do kind of phrase this as, is AI the end of academia, of higher ed? It might be the end of the old way of doing things, but if we can come up with the reason for what we're doing and like hang on to that, AI can help. Absolutely, AI can help. It's a tool like any other, and tools can absolutely be misused.
Yeah.
If we're aware of what they do and how they do it, then we can work to either prevent them from coming into our classrooms as much as possible, or we can incorporate them and say, look, here is what this tool can do, and let's talk about how we use that as scholars in this field. But it all comes back to kind of understanding what it is we're doing, especially at the university level, community college and on up, everything after K through 12, that higher ed, post-secondary education. We need to sit down and decide, are we producing a certain kind of scholar, or are we producing people with a certain set of skills? Because we can do both, but if we stay stuck in this idea that we are reproducing PhDs to do high-level research, to post it in journals and maybe get a monograph published every 4 or 5 years, and put that on your little tenure packet and hope that you get the full-time job or the tenure track job. If that's what we're doing, we're closing ourselves off from the rest of everything. But if we're about communication, if we're about educating the next generation, if we're about helping people get the skills that they want to have the life that they want, then we can, we are absolutely opening ourselves up. Like, this is why it's important that we support first generation students. It's important that we support students with disabilities, students who are non-traditional, veterans, or people who are coming back for a career switch, people in their 40s, 50s. I've had students in their 80s. It's important that we support students of every single background, and give them the tools that we have from our own education. Yes, we are still going to produce other PhDs who do the publication thing and do the traditional route, and that's great, because we do need people who are doing that, but that can't be everybody in the academy, because the point of higher education is the second part. It's the education part. And if we're anything at a college or a university, we are teachers. We have to be. We are teachers. We are researchers. Like, we have 2 jobs that we do. And in my ideal higher education, we would have federal funding for both aspects of what a university does. And we would have research-focused universities and teaching-focused universities like we do, and they would both get funding. And we would have research-focused universities. We'd have people who were specializing in teaching, and vice versa. Like, we'd have both at each. And we would always remember that we're about teaching students, not about, bringing in grant money for the university or bringing in prestige or whatever it is.
Yeah. And it strikes me, I want to kind of like swing us to a close here. I want to synthesize a little bit about what you said, right? With the true roles of the academy. And I think arguably there's probably even more than that, right? I think AI can and should and will inevitably serve a purpose in both of those, right? And as over the course of this conversation, there's this kind of metaphor has come to me, is like calculators, scientific calculators were not the end of math, right? And they were not the end of math classes. And when 2 miles from my house, if I drive a particular way home, I pass a little red schoolhouse, and it's where my partner's father and grandfather went to school, right? And it's the size, it's very, very small. I don't know how many rooms are in it, but it's very small, and it stands there. It's don't know if it's a memorial or whatever, but it's being preserved intentionally. And when I think about that school, right, which was very young through 12, right? People graduated from that same school building that they started kindergarten in. And then the high school that we have in our town now, I think we have 3 high schools, it's different kind of religious high schools as well as our public high school, right? You could look at that schoolroom and then say, look at the massive high schools that we have and go, well, that was the end of education as it should have been, right? And I think that there's been a lot of opportunities throughout history to like shake fist in air about whatever innovation, right? And it's like you said, students are going to student, Bart Simpson does not have a skateboard and cherry bombs to throw in the toilet. Now he's got a Tesla and a computer to like program how to like have all the computers in classrooms, defrag at the same time when there's supposed to be some sort of massive test, right? Like AI is just the next iteration of students being able to screw off creatively. And so our work as educators is to figure out how do we make sure that our work is not about we're teaching something that you can figure out on your own, instead of teaching something that allows you to think for yourself so you can make good critical decisions moving forward in your life and in the construction of a society.
Yeah, yeah. And to those points that you've made, first off, Aristotle complained about the use of slates and graphite pencils by students.
The worst.
They were no longer sitting and like memorizing everything they were told. So like this complaint about how it used to be was better is as old as education. But the other thing is with those scientific calculators, do you remember being told you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket with you everywhere you go? Here we are. So
I don't. I have a computer. I have a supercomputer.
We have computers that are more powerful than the computers that took us to the moon in 1969 in our pockets every day. And we can talk to anybody anywhere in the world with them as long as they also have that computer in their pocket. So it's not that it's going to destroy education. It's going to fundamentally change everything. So yeah, maybe, 10 years ago, ChatGPT was, a pie in the sky kind of a thing. But now we can see that like, yeah, this kind of pattern matching, collating information to produce something that looks like a human wrote it. Sure, that's new. But there comes a point where that's going to be more normalized. And, math classes have had to advance beyond, pushing the pencil and just basic arithmetic because we've got a calculator in our pocket. But now we're teaching more higher kind of higher functions and more complicated math and things like that. And in history, I've got to accept that they're going to find out from Google what the answer to the question is. I can't ask when and where and who on any kind of exam because Google knows and Google can find that. But why? How?
Yeah.
The things that I need them to answer. And that's the shift that needs to happen. Whatever discipline's version of shifting from the basic information to now put it together, that's the shift that needs to happen throughout higher education and education in general, is that we need to shift away from kind of what are the basics that they can find out very easily. And, maybe we need to also teach them how to determine what's a good source of information and what isn't. And then how do we use that? And that's really the core. And that's why, I do say, is AI the end of academia? I don't think so. I think that, oh gosh, it's an old Rita Rudner joke is when you mix together flour and water, you get glue, but then you add sugar and eggs and you get cake. What happened to the glue? We're moving from glue to cake. That's what's happening is AI is sugar and eggs. And so we need to figure out what kind of cake we're making. We accept that we are no longer making glue, we're making cake. So let's figure out what kind of cake we're making and lean into it and embrace it, We get dragged forward. A lot of people in the academy are known for being quite traditional, let's say, and they get dragged forward kind of kicking and screaming into all of these new things. And COVID's a great example of this when we suddenly had to switch to online everything. The number of people who just hated it and couldn't deal with it and were frustrated by it and immediately wanted to get back to face-to-face teaching, was actually not surprising considering how abrupt it was. But, online education is here to stay. Asynchronous courses are here to stay. And it's important that we understand that and incorporate that into how we think about education, higher education in general, and then education at our institutions and things like that. And then get it even more granular into each of the classes that we're teaching and how we are reaching individual students. It's here. And we might not be able to, we can't even consider future proofing against it until we accept that it's here and learn how to work with it.
Amen. What a perfect note to end on. Well, Dr. B, you are the shit. Thank you so much for the privilege of getting to be part of this conversation. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on the site formerly known as Twitter, at Guns and Gams. You can also find me on YouTube, and that channel is Zaina N. Bizri. Just put in my first name, it'll pop up. There aren't many people with my name on YouTube. Yeah, that's about, yeah. Oh, and also you can find me on TikTok at Zaina Bizri. So.
Can you spell Zaina for us real quick?
Oh, yes. Zaina, Zayna, and last name is Bizri, Bizri. And that's why for you English speakers, I tend to be Dr. B.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Last note, I know you're teaching a class on all sorts of good stuff over the summer. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. So over the summer, I'm teaching an independent class, and it is called Reach Beyond the Classroom, Social Media for Academics. And it is what it says on the tin. I'm going to be directing academics towards how to get into social media, how to work with it, and how is it different from other forms of communicating, and getting beyond just, the silly TikTok dances or the kind of tweets about your lunch and things like that. But let's talk about our work online. Let's put out our research wins and losses, and let's talk about when we publish our new thing and put up links and things like that. How do we do that? How do we have that conversation? It's this summer, and it is starting July 10th to August 14th. It's 6 weeks, an hour a week in workshop, and the rest of the time we have a private Facebook group for you to hang out in. And there's going to be information for sign up in the description down below. And yeah.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize anybody can take that. It's not going through a university. Dr. B is teaching it independently on Zoom. So no matter where you are in the world, you're going to be able to participate no matter where you are in the world. Time zone wise, you'll be able to catch replays. So all of the content for the course will be in that private group. So I am so excited to get to see where that course goes. I'm so excited for all of you to get to have the opportunity to learn from her because she is a freaking genius. And thank you again for this conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Bye, everybody.